Well, I will just say some words that Wilfried Wang is one of those rare architects whose practice is not confined to building, but extends, indeed, flourishes through teaching, writing, and curating. Born in Hamburg in 1957, right, and shaped by both East and West, he embodies an intellectual precision. He was trained at the Bartlett School in London, and Wang has since moved fluidly through roles. So he was editor of the 9H, director of the Dam Museum, partner in a Berlin-based practice with Barbara Hoydin, and a professor in the true humanist sense, most recently at Tongji University in Shanghai, right? His concerns are not merely formal, they are ethical, historical, and poetic, we could say. In his work, whether on the Pintoresque or on the politics of representation, architecture becomes a way of reading the world, a form of cultural resistance, and perhaps, above all, a testament to care. Architecture, he argues, has been reduced to, and I quote, giving form to rubbish and making it look attractive in the past years. A thin veneer masking the allowing out of substance under the weight of capitalist efficiency. It is in this critical, urgent voice that we welcome Wilfried Wang with the conference Theory, Criticism, Quality. Many thanks, Wilfried, for being here with us.
Thank you, Martha, for a very kind introduction. Yesterday evening we had dinner, and I have changed my presentation because I was going to give you literally theory, criticism, quality, highly theoretical presentation. So I was advised that I should also focus on research that I had been doing on individual buildings. So I'm going to present E1027 by Eileen Gray and St. Petri Church by Leverance after this. But please endure the introduction, because this is an important part of the research that I've been doing over the last few decades, which started in London when I was working at the Architecture Geometry Research Unit with Florian Beigel. I was a research fellow being asked to develop a methodology for designing public buildings in third world countries. And I said to myself, well, before we do that, we have to have tools to understand what are the local architectural elements before we can actually impose any design. So I will talk about these three things very briefly. What is architecture? And how do we analyze it? What is admissible evidence? So how do we conduct any kind of research, and what is relevant? Architecture is not just a building, an individual building, but in my view, it covers regional planning, landscaping, settlement and urban design, landscape architecture, interiors, fitted and loose furniture, lighting design, and industrial design. Of course, it's a hegemonic grasp, if you like. But I think it has that capacity for people who study architecture to, if they are interested, to move into these other design fields. And this happens quite often in schools of architecture. But principally, architecture gives meaning to society through space and form. Banal thing to say. Is a social practice that occurs in a social context. It expresses social values in the context of existing values. So for people who say, there are some architects who say that their architecture is without rhetoric, or their architecture is without any kind of expression because it's minimalist and so on. Of course, that is all nonsense. Architecture structures the environment and society, right? Also a very boring thing to say, but it's a very important aspect. And it embeds socio-political intentions and cultural ambitions. This is the most important aspect of architecture. The socio-political intentions and the cultural ambitions. Not all designs have cultural ambitions. Yeah, that's clear. If you see a shed somewhere in the rural context, there's not necessarily a cultural ambition. Not necessarily. I'm not saying that it doesn't have, but I'm saying it doesn't necessarily have. Okay, so it is the constitutional representation of a society and in and across its territory. There are different degrees of intentionalities, consciousnesses, and emphases. And you can categorize the activity of architecture, as remember it goes from regional planning to industrial design. But if you focus just on the construction of the environment, there are 4 categories of construction, and they are, I subsume them all under the term architecture, right? But this is only a pars pro toto. It is not really, well, you'll see in a moment. Building, vernacular construction, architecture, and statecraft. Those are 4 levels of construction, and they are different. Right? The vernacular is still around in some parts of the world. It is a form of construction that works on the basis of convention and on continuity. Building is just any kind of assembly of materials without any kind of ambitions whatsoever. It's just shacks. Architecture today has become intellectualized form of design which has absorbed a tradition of revolt, of late puberty, if you like. It's a little bit exaggerated, but it's kind of trying to be different for the sake of being different. And therefore it's distinct from vernacular. Vernacular intends to be the same. And so the cultural unity that you get in vernacular is different from the cultural difference that you have in architecture. I'm not saying that architecture doesn't have the capacity to create cultural unity. There are architects who try to engage in existing contexts and to transform the context, but to engage and not to set oneself through the building apart from the context. Right? So architecture has a professional deformation today, which is based on the way that architectural history is taught through figures like Le Corbusier and continues to people like Rem Koolhaas and Big. Statecraft is what used to be done from Mesopotamia through Greece, through Rome, through, you mentioned it, right? Through Duarte Pacheco, through Albert Speer and Adolf Hitler, right? And in China today. Statecraft is when the state takes a position on structuring the environment from the railway station through to the public building. Which state does that today? Very few. It happens in China, right? It happens in Kazakhstan and happens in some countries like that, right? But statecraft is the ultimate level of construction when everything is considered in a coherent way. Okay? So what is the socio-political intention behind statecraft? What is the cultural intention behind statecraft? I'm just putting it like that. If you reflect on practice in Portugal, in Europe, how many cities in Portugal, how many considerations are there in Portugal for the construction of the state? The last time that happened was under, in the fascist period. Okay, I'm not saying that you have to have fascism for this statecraft. Another form of statecraft that is common today is the engineered dominance of individual car driving, which results in motorways. That's the form of statecraft, right, that we have today in most countries. Okay, I will not talk about this a lot, but just to have a swipe at engineering. Engineering is that area of conscious design that only concentrates on its own problems. It doesn't care what happens left or right, right? And that is a problem. It's self-referential. It's not open to criticism. It has to be like this. It's normative. There are no discussions. And it results in nonsensical environments like this. Right? This is in Berlin, recently completed. You ask yourself, why this kind of detail? Why a change in material? Why a right-angled... Right? Traffic engineers, they don't care. Okay, the vernacular is clear. Examples, where you have the potential identity of client, designer, builder, and user. There are few or no hierarchies. There's internalized communication. There is very little control. There's no intellectualization. And architecture is being involved with this Vitruvian triad to do with, if you translate it into contemporary issues, integrity, coherence. And its distinctive characteristics are that there is a division of responsibilities. There's a commissioning organization, a designer team, contractors, building control. So there's a lot of hierarchies, and these influence how resources flow, and it requires externalized communication. So you have to speak about your project. You cannot just build, right? You have to verbalize what you are trying to do, and you have to convince others. So the reason why theory, criticism and quality, why I was interested in this was to say there are a lot of architects today who are just waffling, who are saying, this building reminds us of a wave form and it's like a homage to the sea, and then you sort of say, well, okay. And clients buy this because they don't know any better, right? So how do we externalize our communication in a way that is precise, as not just poetic license? We need to we need to communicate through these means, and we have to have a reflective discourse, right? Okay, so statecraft is all of this. This is ancient Egypt, actually. I should go, well. Carthage, Paris, Haussmann, Berlin, New York in the 50s, and Shanghai. Okay, architecture consists of theory and practice. On the side of theory, there is description, analysis, and evaluation. On the side of practice, there are elements. There is composition or synthesis, trying to establish meaning. Elements are vocabulary, synthesis is the syntax, and semantics is meaning. Practice and theory are mirror processes. We need to have descriptions of elements, and we need to be able to analyze the composition in order to evaluate the meaning. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about this because it is the long version, but what I would like to just indicate is that in order to be able to be precise, we have cognitive powers, we use cognitive variables, there are morphological types, elements, and categories. And it's these things that are then further analyzed in terms of their relations, and I won't talk about this in detail because I need to move on. I want to talk about quality. Let me just interrupt here and say there are morphological categories, right? Humans have the capacity to separate 5 different morphological categories within construction. They are the constructional elements, the tectonic elements, the compartmental elements, the configurational elements, and the contextual elements. They are separate ways of thinking about these. They are all different capacities of construction. And this is a very important realization because we can differentiate different parts to wholes that way. So we can analyze the relationship between, for example, this portal frame here in relation to that facade element as a part in relation to the whole of that facade, right? And that has a different order of magnitude to the overall space. We come into a space, we see a space, we don't see the elements first of all, right? So this capacity of cognition is one of the important capacities of ordering our ways of thinking and our ways of designing. So I'm going to jump to quality and talk about what we are able to and how we are able to evaluate our architecture. There are 3 levels of complexity. The constitution of a construction, its integrity, and its sociocultural impact. Those are, on the one hand, internal, and this is internal and relational, to all sorts of other phenomena outside, and what a building actually does in its context. So, first of all, constitution, we know this commodity, firmness, and delight. I won't talk about that because we all know what that means. I'm going to talk about integrity that is compositional. Does an element in relation to the overall form make sense? Does that window over there make sense in relation to the overall space? It's placed axially. Does that doorway down there make sense, or does it look a little bit strange, etc. Conceptual. What was the original concept, and to what extent has it been translated in a building? Right? That's part of an analytical work that needs to be done. The ethical position. What is the position of the building? What impact does it have on people's consciousness, on people's behavior? And the use of materials is also an ethical dimension, right? So you have the ethical dimension or the ethical relationships are multiple. What is its aesthetic appeal? Okay, finally, what is the socio-cultural impact? What is the original ambition, which goes back to the concept? But the concept is sometimes in purely architectural terms, the concept can be, I'm a minimalist architect, I want this space to be just all white, and the service is all silver, and therefore that's my aesthetic concept. But what is the socio-cultural ambition of this? Why should it be minimalist? And then the question is, what contribution does it make to knowledge, the state of knowledge? It's like your PhD students, you are making a contribution to the field of knowledge. What contribution does a building make to the field of knowledge about this kind of building typology, to architecture in total? What is its impact on the consciousness of its users, on their behavior? Does it become a paradigm because it's appreciated to be such a great example of architecture that it becomes a model for others and it becomes an icon? An icon doesn't come about just because you make a shape. Of course, nowadays it is, but in order for something to have an iconic power, it has to have these qualities, that it actually has an impact on society. And is it beautiful and is it so attractive that you want to reproduce it, right? So these things are, in my understanding, the ways to analyze the quality of buildings. And I know that there have been a lot of debates in Germany, elsewhere. How do we actually formalize this? Because there's LEED certification, there's BREEAM, there are all these kinds of certification processes, and they acknowledge that they do not talk about design quality. They talk about CO2 emissions, blah, 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 right? But they do not talk about what are the inherent qualities and why are we not able to talk about it? And this is one of the reasons why I took it upon myself to try and develop this set of criteria in order to be able to talk about this in a transparent way, right? So I leave it at that. That is something for you to think about and chew on. And now I will talk, I'll turn to, is this now visible online?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. So E1027, maybe you know a lot about it already. It was designed by Eileen Gray in connection with Jean Badovich, her friend at the time, constructed between 1926 and 1929. Eileen Gray was not an architect. She came from painting. She went to a Japanese lacquer artist and learned from him in Paris, and established her own furniture making and carpet design. And she was part of the editorial team in the background of L'Architecture Vivante, avant-garde French architecture magazine. And in the conversations between Jean Badovich, who was a chief editor, and herself, she was highly critical. And one day, Badovich basically had enough, and he said, when you're always criticizing, why don't you do something yourself? Okay, So she started to learn how to draw. Within a few years, from 1922 to 1923, she started to learn how to draw. And she designed this building on the coast of France, and that's the view today. When she bought this land, Gray was an independently wealthy person. She bought the site in the name of Jean Badovich. She paid for the construction. She was on the site as the architect. She carried building material, and she donated everything to him. Right? So this is a fantastic situation that you have there. At the time, there were hardly any buildings on the coast. And that's the main entrance. This is the ground floor plan, the upper floor plan. You approach from here down and you enter through here. This is the main living space with a niche and a shower and a hand wash basin with a divan, a storage cabinet, a staircase going down and up to the roof, an intermediate space here going to the toilet, to the bathroom, and the master bedroom with a study area here. This here is a breakfast or dining area, and this is the winter kitchen, which is interior, and this is summer kitchen, which is exterior. This is the lower floor plan, so there's actually a void space underneath the main volume here. This is the maid's room, which is absolutely tiny, and this is a guest room here. That's it. This is the first survey done by Jean-Paul Réan in 1974. He visited this building, knocked at the door, and the then owner, Marie-Claude Schelbert, opened, and she said, "Well, what do you want?" And he said, I want to, with your permission, to survey this building because this is a very important building of modern architecture. And she said, "Yeah, I know, it's by Le Corbusier." She bought this at an auction that happened after Badovich died, years after he died, and Corbusier found out about it, and he organized Marie-Claude Schelbert, he basically asked around his circle of friends who was able to come to the auction to buy this house because he was concerned about his murals that he painted over in this space. So this is how it looked after the previous owner, after Marie-Claude Schelbert. It went to her doctor, Dr. Kegi, and he was found murdered in this building. Anyway, this is one of the 5 murals that Le Corbusier painted with the permission of Jean Badovich. And when Eileen Gray found out about it, she was very upset because she said this building doesn't need paintings because she had a very clear color scheme for it. Anyway, it has been restored, and there is a very subtle screen system that can be pulled up to cover the Le Corbusier mural. This is the view of the reconstructed house now. I came across this building in the 1980s. In 9H, we published the work of Eileen Gray through the interest of Rosamund Diamond, who was keen on exploring this work. And I was fascinated by the plan. I couldn't make head or tails of it. I didn't understand what was going on. And I don't have time to point out everything in these photographs, because everything that you see in these photographs are things that Eileen Gray designed, right? She designed the site, the landscaping, the building, the interior planning, the fitted furniture, the loose furniture, the carpets, the lighting system, the door handle, right? So The sliding folding windows apparently were designed by Jean Badovich, because there's a patent that has been taken out in his name. This is the incomplete master bedroom. And these are photographs. The black and white photographs are photographs by Eileen Gray herself. She had, interestingly, a special camera that a neighbor of hers, the father of a neighbor, was a criminal investigation policeman in Paris who had a special camera. And that's what was used here. I'm going to point out just a few things. This here is an adjustable drawing table. There are no plans of it. There are no drawings of it left. This element here can be lifted, and it was used by Badovich as a lectern, so he could practice his lectures. And this top can be folded. And nobody knew the mechanism of this, because there were no drawings. She designed this ceiling light with the steel suspension element. She designed this coiffeuse. She designed this chest of drawers. She designed the chair. What else? She designed about 27 items in this room. If you have done any industrial design, any furniture design ever, you will understand the intensity that is required to design any kind of piece of furniture, let alone about 100 for this building from the period of 1926 to 29, right? Okay. This is the master bedroom naked, without furniture. You know, people say, oh, well, she was just a furniture designer, right? I mean, I won't say woman, but it's bad enough, because I was part of the scientific committee for the restoration of this building, and there were two people who were supporters of Eileen Gray, and 9 who were supporters of Le Corbusier. And so they were only interested in the maintenance of the murals, right? They didn't give a damn about anything else, and they didn't have a clue how to reconstruct the interior. Anyway, this is how it looked, and of course, if you look at this, it's like, well, what's in this? There's nothing here. Then you add all these pieces, and it changes the spirit of the space completely. It identifies areas in front of the hand wash basin, around the coiffeuse, where you clean your face, you dress your hair. There's a chest of drawers here, there's a bedroom, there's a folding, sliding, rotating, folding bedside table. This is the desk. Right here in a large version. Anyway, I don't have time because I want to talk about other things too, but it is about layering. It's about inventing new notation systems. Right? This is the plan showing how movement patterns and sunlight and so on, cross ventilation is considered. These are her drawings of the master bedroom. Oops. What is happening? Have I pressed something wrong? Oh, okay. Yeah, so this is kind of a press proof, and these are diagrams that she published, and I don't know for those people sitting a long way away. She's comparing a normal rectangular room to the master bedroom. Why is she splitting the master bedroom? She's saying, if we split the same area like this, if you're in this space, you have a sense that this space is bigger because there is that appendage. So there's a kind of an expansion of space. And also, there is a delayed way of seeing the space as you enter from this side, right? So you have more of the space. This is a kind of richer spatial experience. So even though it's the same area, you actually have more value for your money, so to speak. The other thing that is important, there's a strip window here, and there's the composition of the wall, the corner of the wall here is important, because if you lie in this bed with your head here, you do not see the end of the panoramic window. And these windows here are the only windows in the 1920s of any horizontal fenêtre en longueur that were completely openable. If you look at Le Corbusier or Mies, there are always fixed window parts. So you have this kind of nominal fenêtre en longueur, but it's not really experienced as a panorama because you have a fixed piece of window, right? But when you're lying here and all the windows are open, you get the sense of the panorama and you do not see the end of the window. So you get the sense of extension, right? So there's a double sense of space through this split and through this detail. Nobody's talked about it previously because nobody's been lying in the bed. And it's only because of the reconstruction that we did at the University of Texas that we discovered that quality. Right, the other thing that is important, this is the reconstruction of the master bedroom that we organized, right? We made every single piece, and some of these pieces were made in Portugal. Fantastic workmanship, absolutely amazing. To the actual, I can't see it, but there's a cast hinge, which is absolutely mind-blowing how they did it. Anyway, this thing, to reconstruct this thing, took us as a team 2.5 years to work out how that was actually working. I found this hand wash basin, which is identical to the one that is in E1027, on French eBay, with identical taps. And here you see this mirror with a folding part. And of course, it's still produced, and people wonder, why is there a folding part? And you only understand it when you sit on this bar stool, and you have this folding part, and you have this mirror of the coiffeuse. And so you see the back of your head when you adjust both mirrors. And of course, nobody knew that because nobody was ever in this space. This was not there to understand. So only through the reconstruction was it possible to understand what she had in mind and why this was done that way, right? Now, it takes some work. Anyway, there's so many incredible things about it. I don't have time to talk about it, but here you see this little opening in the shutter. With the daybed here, you would lie down, and when you close the shutter, there's that opening, and you would see like a camera obscura in the distance. So you're in this kind of niche, cozy niche, but you have this spatial extension to a long, long distance. And that makes this small space expand, right? Simple device. I've not seen it elsewhere. Invented by a non-architect, right? She's a non-architect. Remember, she's just a furniture designer. Anyway, she came from lacquer work. She was interested in layers. She studied the Dutch. She went to see these people. She designed a table and called it the style table. So, here's a person who's paying homage to the influences. She's not saying, I'm the brilliant designer, I'm a brilliant inventor. She was brilliant, but she didn't say that. Okay, I won't talk about this because there are so many different layers embedded in this, except to say she studied laws. She looked at this 1923 project, she traced over it. She was in the exhibition 1923 at the Salon d'Automne, and she redesigned the project. There are 3 different versions of Eileen Gray's redesigns, right? Doing this kind of modernized version, right? This kind of Le Corbusier or the 20th, the kind of white architecture. And there are other kinds of references in the vicinity. Le Corbusier said, this house was copied on the basis of my design that I made for my parents on the Lake Geneva, right? It's kind of linear thing. I mean, the only similarity is that the fact that they're linear, that's it. I would say that she took inspiration from the Villa Moissy, because if you stretch this, you get this. Yeah? You get the expressed element here, the terrace and the series of staircases. That's what was in her mind, not Le Corbusier. Right? Of course, you know, that would even have bothered Le Corbusier even more to know that he was not the one who she was copying. Anyway, and that's the furniture, right? Conventional furniture on the inside. Okay, so, yeah, I don't have much time left to talk about St. Petri. Eileen Gray was the only non-architect who designed a masterpiece in all facets in her first piece of architecture. There is nobody else in the 20th century who designed a masterpiece from siting to detail. Nobody. You mention somebody, we can compare, right? I'm happy to entertain the comparison. In my view, nobody, right? And the question is, why is Le Corbusier held up in such high esteem if actually the innovation in terms of modern architecture, the impulse, was here? I will finish with some things that fascinate me, and I'm not sure whether they fascinate you. This is the folding, rotating table in my apartment. I have had it reproduced. But I want to talk about, the problem is that there are so many details, right? So this is there are a few photographs of this rotating, folding table. How does this work? You see a line here, you see a stay here, you see this thing that rotates, you see something there. How does this work? It took us 2.5 years to reconstruct this piece and to make it. It was made here in Portugal, right? And it's simply amazing, a small piece like this. Yeah, and this is one of, as I say, one of 100 pieces. How did we reconstruct this? Well, a student went to Roquebrune and made some speculative drawings and did a reverse perspective and realized that this piece here is not symmetrically placed on the top. It's asymmetrically placed. Right? You would not have guessed from the photograph. Okay, that we then made these pieces. Okay, I will just finish with her interest in proportions. These are some drawings that she did of another project earlier on, and things in the archive in the V&A in London studying golden section. This is the glass turret that goes onto the roof. This is the roof plan. This is a drawing by her of the golden rectangle. And what do we see? We see the position of the bedside bookcase is in golden section to the wall. The position of the bedside table is in golden section to this wall. The position of the folding rotating bedside table is in golden section to this wall. Golden section everywhere, right? So the plan looks deceptively loose, but actually everything is positioned according to a proportional system, guys. And so, okay, Le Corbusier used it too, and of course, if Le Corbusier uses the golden section, well, amazing, yeah. Fibonacci, he invents a new measuring system. He plagiarizes a Fibonacci and says, it's my proportional system here, right? I mean, in academic circumstances, he would be kicked out for plagiarism, for rather simple plagiarism. Okay. I don't know whether you have a stomach or time. Yeah, sure. Because you want time to ask questions, and I'm nearly out of time. Yeah? Okay, so why is Klippan St. Petri, the church, so important? It's one of his last projects by Sigurd Leverens, who had a long life like Eileen Gray. It was designed, it started in 1961 when he was 76, so already quite old. And he, in fact, complained that he didn't have the energy and he didn't have anybody working for him. And it was only as a result of friendship with Peter Selsing that he was able to design all the things. And it's a special building because, as you see here in the detailed photograph, you have irregular brickwork where's my cursor? Anyway, I won't go into this. This is the context. This is Sweden. This is a building he designed in the 1930s for a steel merchant, Villa Edstrand. He was involved in the over 60 years design of the Malmö Eastern Cemetery, for which he also designed a flower shop. And he was part of the Lund School. This is Claes Anselm. This is Bernd Nieberg. This is the typical farmyard oxblood building. And this is his first large church in Stockholm called Björkhagen, meaning birch grove. So it's a church amongst birch trees. It's made out of brick and has these amazing details. So if you look at this image for a moment, you see a kind of a pattern of tiles here that changes. And then the question is, well, why change? It relates to adjacent rooms, and it treats the floor like the tiling like a carpet. Also, this photograph shows it quite well. The birch trees, with their characteristic bark, take on, or there's a kind of an echo between the brickwork that has very wide mortar joints and the birch bark. So he calls this melanspel, a kind of an interlude in a birch grove. The building is thought to be this kind of interlude. This is the flower shop, his last building. All right, I won't go into this because I don't have time. Okay. In the 30s, he entered a competition for a church in Johanneberg, and this is the massing. He's trying out a square plan that has a diagonal layout with an organ and an entrance volume here and sacristy. And this building is for the priests, their offices, and their catechism rooms, right, where the Bible reading takes place. So this typology is in fact what he applies, but in a different way, and St. Petri, where you have a square mass for the nave, belfry, and an attached entrance sequence here with a small so-called wedding chapel. The priest's offices here, the committee room there for the parishioners, and then the teaching spaces for the Bible reading, and the communal multi-purpose space. And when you look at this plan, you say, well, you know, this is rather boring. Square plan for a nave, rectangular plan for a meeting room, nothing special. Everything is orthogonal, right? Sort of, what's the big deal, right? So you could ask. And that's how it sits on a site. It's on a corner of a triangular park in the town of Klippan, and it's hidden away. It's not visible. It's completely obscure, right, behind hedges. And so it's like you have to discover it. On very rare occasions do they open the west porch. Difficult for you to see. These are pencil drawings, which were done by a Greek architect called Michail Papadopoulos. Michail Papadopoulos was a collaborator of Dimitri Pikionis, a Greek, one of the most important Greek architects of the 20th century. And he actually wanted to work for Le Corbusier, but Peter Selsing met Michail Papadopoulos in Paris and offered him a job in his office. So that's how he then went to Sweden. And I think he didn't regret it. Here's a view of the entrance area. This is the offices of the priest. There's a staircase down to children's daycare, which I think is the weakest part of the design, frankly, in the basement. I don't think that is a suitable space for children. These are some of the details of the brickwork on the exterior. So you could ask, well, what is the importance of this brickwork? Why is the irregularity so significant in the mind of Leverens? And it is the counterpoint to the precise geometry. So you have a square plan, everything is sort of rather straightforward and dumb, but if you had the brickwork like absolutely precise mechanistic brickwork, the whole thing begins to become highly sterile. So this kind of dynamic brickwork, as it were, removes this kind of sterility from the geometry. It makes the walls come alive, so to speak. And at the next level of perception, the windows, which are these double glass units, are applied with these simple clips. They're also laid out in such a way that you get this play on the facade. And they relate to the office use on the inside. And this is a view of the catechism rooms. So here's a detailed view of the glass, and that is a window that is on the other side of this slot here. So here, this is a drawing, an unusual perspective drawing showing the brick seats that are actually, in terms of the profile, very comfortable. They have these felt pieces so that when it's, especially when in winter when it's cold, you don't get a cold bottom. Okay, so here's a detail of how the wall works. It's actually a double skin brick. You have a same brick on the inside and the outside, and the space in between is used as a builder's duct to heat the skin. So it's actually the entire, there are no radiators. The hot air comes through this gap. There's a gap between the glass and the shelf on the inside, and the hot air comes up and heats the glass pane. You can't do this anymore in terms of building codes. I don't think anywhere. Okay, so, and the windows also have to be, the silicone around the windows have to be changed every 10 to 15 years. Okay, so let's go in. This is the wedding chapel. So you enter in this small space with this 2 vaults, 2 seats for the couple, this bench, brick bench for the, what do they call it, the members of the family, and the priest stands here. This floor is treated like a carpet in terms of its pattern. One material throughout in terms of the walls, and the floors have different tiles. This is the toilet, again like a carpet. This is a hand wash basin, which I think is a fantastic applied plumbing. And we are now going to go into this nave, and we enter on the diagonal. In the front you see a man-eating shell, and you see this kind of slightly raised floor. When nobody's in here, I mean, normally if you visit this space, the electric lights are off and there are no candles on the wall, so it's completely dark. The only light you get is from these windows here. And you hear the sound of dripping water, and then you notice there's a pipe here that drips water into the shell. But the visual drop does not relate to the sound. So you then say, wait a minute, I can see a drop, but I can hear something later. And what happens is that this water falls into this, and it overflows and drops through the slot into the pool that is underneath this vault. So the vault amplifies the sound of the drop. And normally there aren't many people here, so you then sort of start to think. And this is the beginning of most people who are then saying, interesting. You start to think about this, you start to think about all sorts of other things that you see. Right? And it's this reflection in terms of the kind of inward-looking reflection that Leverens was interested in. This is a floor plan showing you the brickwork, the pattern in relation to the seating. You notice this structure here, the T, a double T that supports 4 steel beams that support these vaults, conical vaults. And you see the representation of the cross in the middle of the community, of the congregation. It's obvious what that means, right? Don't have to be a Christian to understand that. So, constant reminder, he died for us. Leverens also designed typography, and in this case he designed the numbers for the hymns and the psalms. He designed the light fittings. He didn't design the chairs there from Karel Klint, Danish colleague. Yeah, and it's a complex roof. It's not straightforward barrels. They're not horizontal. They are inclined. They are tapering. They vary in terms of shape. They are segmental in one case and pointed in another case. So you get this kind of variation on the facade, which is a homage to the Renaissance or to pre-Renaissance architecture. This is a structural diagram, shows the structural system. And something that, of course, Leverens and others are interested in this kind of primary state of existence, right? You have this brickwork with the double glaze unit on the outside. And so you see this structure like basic primary structure. Right? You don't see any frame, there's nothing intervening. You see directly and you understand that this is what it is. It is brick and it's a wall. And that in distinction to Le Corbusier's Renchant, which is about concrete and plaster, right? So this is a Protestant church versus the effusiveness of a Catholic church, right? This is also, of course, a polemic. Leverens didn't talk about it. This is a view from the sacristy to the altar, and there are light wells above that mark the path of the priest. Everything is out of brick, different kinds of bricks. The bench here again is out of brick. Opposite the organ is this wall, which has different dimensioned slots in terms of height and width set in the brick wall to absorb certain frequencies. And in order to lay this wall, there was this drawing. I'll show you in detail. Can you see this a little bit better? You see these things precisely laid out with even the irregular joint thicknesses drawn, right? So every single brick is drawn. Not every single brick, but in this case, every single brick. And if you compare that to a CAD drawing of this church, which was prepared by Danish students, you understand that if you were to do this within CAD, you would lose everything. The whole soul of the project would be destroyed by the regularity of the rendering. Can't help it. You can't do this kind of architecture using CAD. Okay. This building is about the relationship between architect and craftsmanship. And at the end of the project, Leverens wrote a letter to the foreman, Carl Sjöholm, saying, you have always been a trustworthy and very competent and very genial colleague to work with. I've been able to use your experience to improve the design. I think we have achieved something that is worthy of being reviewed. So, St. Petri is a building that invites the users into reflections about the church, about life, about how a church could be constructed, and how, if it's constructed out of real materials, how a church as an institution increases its credibility, right? Because it is factually there. It is like this massive structure, as opposed to something that has plaster, right? And is immaterial and is ethereal and is like kind of, oh, yeah, it's something else. So my personal interest in some of these people's work, of these architects, is they use materials in not just in a constructionally true way, but they are using it to transcend the kind of constructional truth to achieve another level of consciousness, right? And that of a credible being, an object, a credible object. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Well, many thanks. I'd like to open for questions. I don't know if there are questions from the public. Yes, Pedro Bahia, professor here in the school.
Thank you, Wilfried. In your lecture, there were two moments where you mentioned minimalist design, and also you talked about boredom, something about something is bore. And that reminded me of that motto of Peter Behrens, and then by Mies van der Rohe, less is more. And then that was attacked by Venturi in '66, that less is a bore. And you also mentioned Bjarke Engels, and he also has a motto that you must be aware of: yes is more. And so I was thinking, if you have a kind of thinking or an essay or a manifesto or a book about bore is more.
Actually, some years ago, I gave a talk on in Austria, where in German the word boring is Langeweile. Something is langweilig, something is boring. But Langeweile also means long-lasting. And so I think the important thing is to understand how to achieve a balance in any design between a credible construction and without creating speculation or speculative forms, right? That is in itself poised. And that has a kind of a inherent, what do you call it, resting in itself, so to speak. And this kind of brickwork, has a dynamism in it that is subtle, you don't really realize it until you actually start to think about it, or you actually look at it, and then you see, oh, yeah, it's, you see it's like a moire effect. It's like kind of, like a textile. It is like a piece of crafted material, handcrafted material. You understand that humans have been involved, as opposed to machines, right? Da, 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 da. And it's that presence of the labor of people that I think is translated in this detail into the space. And then there are other kinds of irregularities, right? The fact is that the double T structure is not exactly in the middle. It's just a little bit off. The four beams are not exactly in the middle. And then, the conical roofs are inclined, and they have this kind of a dynamism. And it's all these things that are calibrated to create a kind of a lively, a kind of a moment in the space, or moments in the space. And I think these are all important to read together, but analyzed initially on their own, but read together. And I mean, let me put it as simply as I took my mother and my great aunt into the space, and I started, like I have just now, spending a few minutes trying to. My mother asked me, "Why is this building important?" And I started, and my great aunt said, "Oh, you mean with few materials he could achieve a lot?" Yeah, that's it. He uses brick, he uses steel. What more do you need, right? But of course, the windows are the windows, and everything is thought through. But he was able to achieve so much with so few things. And it's that skill that I think architects are not interested in, the majority of them, or the majority of people who get published, or who publish themselves when they buy a space on Arch Daily, they try to be like that, right? So boredom is a quality that is not easily reached if you know how to, if it's not just literal boredom like white walls.
Well, I would also like to link the two parts of your presentation, the idea of quality in architecture and the two works that you have presented, because I think you think these are quality architectural buildings. And you spoke about the aesthetical and the ethical dimension of quality. And of course, that includes also what you call the social, the appropriation by people of these spaces. But then when you show us Eileen Gray and Leverance, you are showing us a total work of art, no? Where they design everything. Of course, there is a kind of appropriation, but everything is somehow predicted how to be used. So I would like you to tell us when this doesn't happen, because most of the buildings that we are designing today will not have this total approach. It's impossible. Where does this thing stop? Where does quality, or how can it be measured when it's beyond the architecture design?
I think it's a very important question, and I think that there are architects who have pioneered this question, or answered this question, like Josef Frank. Josef Frank would say, and in part Adolf Loos, they would say, if you have things that you want in your interior that I haven't designed, please put them in, right? So there have been these architects who have not designed everything. Of course, Loos also designed furniture. Frank also designed furniture. But they explicitly said, if somebody has a memory, or there's something, a family heirloom that they want to maintain, yes, the carpets from the aunt, blah, 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 it's all okay. And their architecture is actually inclusive. That is the point. The way that they have designed their spaces is inclusive. as opposed to John Pawson. You know, if you have John Pawson, minimalist architect, you know, I differentiate between minimal architects and minimalist architects. Minimal architects use minimal means to achieve maximum effects. Minimalist architects try to make things look simple, but it normally takes an enormous effort to make them look simple, like Zumthor's swimming pool or spa in Vals, right? You look at the detail, there's 6 layers of glass in those glass slots, right? But it looks simple, it's just a gap, right? But so, what is the, if we think about the Greeks and the Parthenon, how far do you need to go to make a profile of a joint, of a connection, something up there that nobody sees, right? And they were thinking about these things, right? You could say that's obsessive, but they were perfectionists in that sense. And the Romans were, give me Greek details, we plan cities. We conquer the world, right? This is what Adolf Loos writes in his essay. The Greeks wasted their time on details, and the Romans went for the world, right? And that's the difference between Eileen Gray and Le Corbusier. Eileen Gray spent hours and hours detailing everything, you know, making everything together like a modern Greek total work of art. And Le Corbusier said, make a big gesture plan here, you know, section there, right? And so he's now the most influential 20th century architect, still, unfortunately. But Marta, I know you worked on Le Corbusier. Oh, sorry. I can't measure it, but there are, you know, post-occupancy ways of doing it. I mean, you can see, for example, in the case of the Philharmonie or the case of this church, how people, you know, feel comfortable and how they use it, and how it's pristine, right? There's no graffiti on it and something like that. So you understand that certain buildings have this, enjoy this admiration. I think there's that. But the scientific way of doing it is by post-occupancy, right? Evaluation.
I have to make this question because you're putting a lot Eileen Gray against Corbusier. And you were defining architecture in the beginning of your presentation, but what do you, this is my end question, but I'll justify afterwards. What does define an architect? As in, you said Eileen Gray was not an architect, but she did the work of architecture. Le Corbusier wasn't an architect, and he did lots of buildings architecture. And also, John Pawson, I think, is not an architect. I'm not sure, but so what do you think does define an architect?
You don't have to be a qualified person to be an architect, right? You don't have to have gone through a school of architecture. I mean, in certain countries, yes, you have to, in order to be able to submit plans to the authorities. Not in Switzerland. In Switzerland, you don't have to be, you can be anybody who can hand in plans to the authorities. So, what does it mean to be an architect? It means to be aware of everything, right? And to respond to everything, and to make appropriate design decisions so that the whole thing hangs together, has integrity. Now that sounds very simple, right? But it's very, very hard. You think about, what door handle should I choose for these doors, right? Should it be this system, should it be that system, blah, 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 blah. So you make a decision at that level, because why? Because it's something that people touch. and it is a way of connecting to a building. You think about, what should be the grid pattern here in this space? Why is it important that there's a center line here? Right? So, is it important? Is it important that there's a grid line here, etc., etc.? Right? You make certain choices, and it's these choices from the color of the material to the surface pattern of the material to the reflectiveness of the material to the price to the way it's delivered and the way that people are working this, that everything you think about, right? And then you think about, what am I going to do with the connection between the wall and the floor? Well, this architect here says, I don't want the skirting, because that is not modern. And then what happens is that the cleaner comes along and leaves a mark. Collateral damage, right? So, and the point is, you ask the question, what qualifies a piece of architecture? What you need to be an architect? An architect has the capacity to think holistically, or should have the capacity to think holistically, and to answer every question from the point of view of the original concept that you have in mind for a building. Right? And that is a huge, huge responsibility, and requires enormous principled thinking. And then, of course, the opportunistic architects who say, I don't care, just put some plastic there, right? What height? You decide what height, right? No, you would not want to have anybody else decide what level these light fittings are, right? So, yes, that's the answer. You have to be, and Eileen Gray was a designer who had the capacity to think like an architect. From 22 to 26 in 3 years. She learned architecture in 3 years, and she made a masterpiece in, further 3 years. Yeah, of course we should. Yeah. I mean, as people consider Le Corbusier an architect, right? Or even John Pawson.
In relation with that, do you think architecture is art?
Yeah, I think architecture is a form of art, because I think, as art, architecture has the capacity, I'm not saying that all pieces of architecture or buildings do that, but to make us think, right? If you go into the Philharmonie by Sharon, you are disoriented. You're wondering, what's happening? Well, why are the staircases like this? And why is the seating like this? And why is not everything symmetric? And you start to think, and then when the music begins, you understand, yeah, we're here because we are in the round. And there's a kind of magic moment when the atmosphere of the audience and the orchestra comes together, and then you understand, yeah, it's a open space. And also in detail happens to allow people to move around on the inside of the foyer spaces and on the inside of the auditorium. So for people who go regularly to the Philharmonie, if you see empty seats in the more expensive areas, the habitués wait on some of the staircase platforms, then the doors close, and then they sit in the more expensive seats, because you can move from any seat to any other seat within the auditorium. Which other concert hall allows you to do that, right? And it's that kind of detailed translation of a social model. Sharon was a social democrat, one of the few social democratic architects that actually lived in Germany during the Second World War. And he had a very clear idea about society and how the language of architecture should be transformed to welcome or to transform the society itself, right? And so you see that in his school designs, in his more important public buildings.
I just want to say something. Thank you so much for your lecture. It was really, really incredible. You explained what, for instance, Ricardo Carvalho and me, we are always trying to explain to our students, but in a much better way. So, thank you so much.
One more question.
Well, first of all, thank you, Wilfried, for the marvelous and inspiring conference and all what you showed to us. Well, amazing. You showed this facade with the glass of the church, which is very inspiring also and very expressive. And I was thinking about on the other way, almost like the walls with the trunks and the windows of the cabanon of the Corbusier, just to and also the skylight in the convent of La Tourette. There is the skylight, this marvelous skylight made of concrete, but in a way that industrial work looks like almost a craftsman work, you know. And I was precisely looking at this. But my main thing that I'd like to say is that I felt particularly interested in what you mentioned about social, cultural impact of the building. And I was thinking which building can, in my imagination, I could figure out like being and fulfilling all the items that you mentioned. And I sort of have a completely different thing from what we are talking today. I thought of Le Pompidou. And I was thinking about ambition, and I said, okay, there was ambition. So there was ambition to demolish the whole block and try to make a new building, a new space, a new public space. In relation to the building, there was innovation for sure, you know, in terms of architecture, in terms of all the mechanisms and everything. There was for sure consciousness about the way it was set up. There was behavior, in the way people use it, in the way city use it, and everything. And it became a paradigm in a sense. And it became a model, an icon and a symbol of Paris and of culture and of how the way to show. So it's different from a classical notion of a museum with rooms and everything. It's just flat space and flat space. But then I was, you know, like I stuck on the last one. So like beauty and reproduction. So there were no reproductions of Pompidou almost. And how can we define beauty in a building like that? You know, so it's different from a classical notion of beauty. It brings a new, let's say, image to the public, a new kind of approach from the public, you know, and even from the non-architectural public. So let's say, and I would like if you allow me to ask this.
So beauty is an important part of the quality of things, right? And there are different. We all have different preferences in terms of beauty, right? So it's not just a phrase, beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. That is banal, right? We all have preferences, but we can categorize certain aesthetic phenomena. We can say the way that something is designed or the painting, there's sublime. It has sublime qualities. Some people like the sublime, some people think it's boring, right? Then there's the picturesque. Something is irregular, you know, you don't understand the order, and it has this kind of natural disorder. Some people like that, and they think that that is beautiful, right? So there are, and you can say there are other things like brutal, right? I mean, some people like that kind of thing, some people like horror. You know, wherever there are different kind of aesthetic senses, you can identify them. And then you can say, well, you know, that's that kind of aesthetic category and so on, and so on, and so on. Whether it's beautiful for everybody in the world is something else. That is not the issue, because people have different preferences. But you can talk about it in the same way as you can talk about other qualities of the building. You know, whether a detail relates to the whole or not. and whether the concept relates to the building, or whether the building relates to the context, or whether the program relates to the public or the government program for childcare or old people care, right? And so you can make these kinds of evaluations. That, I think, is the important thing that I try to say about the structure that I'm laying out in front of you. And in terms of beauty, yes, we can talk about these things, but we cannot talk about it in the way that says, for 70% of the population, this will be beautiful, because it doesn't apply. Some people don't like brutalism. Some people misunderstand brutalism. This is a brutalist church, right? But it's not brutalist in the same way as some later architects or the film tries to make out, right?
Thank you for the very inspiring lecture. I think one can mention also that in today's standards, this might be a very sustainable position, the one that Leverance did on this project. You've mentioned Piccionis. I find it very inspiring that he was working with the stones available for the Athens, for the Acropolis pathway. As far as I know, Leverance had to meet financial constraints also designing this building. And so he chose the cheapest brick available, the one that sits on the bottom of the kiln. And that's very interesting because he had to enlarge the joint to get a structural strength out of the building. Otherwise it would collapse and it turned into a design motif. I also find it very interesting that he spent 15 years designing window frames and that he didn't use those window frames in this building. And it's beautiful because you don't see the frame. So he's making a statement also, and he's doing a very sustainable, for today's standards, position by reusing what was going to be just waste. No one would buy those bricks. No.
Thank you very much for that important information. I think,
I'd like to know if you think there is a discipline of architecture, corpus of knowledge specific to architecture.
Of course there is, and Vitruvius was one of the first authors to collect the corpus of knowledge, and you understand that he has knowledge of construction techniques and materials, the choice of the site, how water flows, how rain impacts the buildings, etc. So yes, there is this wealth of knowledge written down by Vitruvius and then also theorized. And of course, there's also a corpus of knowledge in vernacular construction. Very much so, because they have experienced the climate, they have limited resources, they all use the same materials, they use similar details. There's only a marginal change from one generation to another, if at all, right? So there's a corpus of knowledge in vernacular construction. And today, there is an attempt to make everything new at every level, which is an illness, because why should you redesign or re-specify certain kinds of things? I know in terms of concrete, maybe we make a different kind of concrete, right? Because it's less CO2 emitting, etc., etc. But if you see composite materials that are being developed by the building industry, like sandwich panels with aluminium and insulation, with using certain kinds of glues that you can easily hang, like the new office building for Galp and next to the bridge, right? You see this kind of white panel. Well, you know it's going to have to be replaced in 10 years or even faster. And then what do you do with these panels? They have composite things in them. How do you separate the materials? Right? So the responsibility in terms of sustainability is why make things more complicated? And the building industry makes things more complicated because it makes things, the construction period shorter and things thinner. And therefore the area, the floor area is larger. You know, all that kind of capitalist nonsense that is against sustainability. Right? So talk about corpus of knowledge. We know what we should do, we don't. And we follow, because of our professional deformation, this goal of innovation, 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 and we fall prey to the building industry, you know, because they say, oh yeah, we can do that. New materials, you know, kind of CO2 saving, blah, 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 blah. It's all greenwashing, right? And so, yeah, we don't have to go back to Vitruvius, but where is the inner conscience that architects, I'm talking about principles, right? What are the principles that we should follow? And if we think that we should be innovative and different for the sake of innovation and difference, we end up where we are today. In a world where things don't hang together, right? To quote a poem, the center cannot hold, right? The center cannot hold is because things are moving away from an idea of cohesion of a culture. And that is, you know, worldwide. China, United States, Germany, everywhere. So, you know, the challenging question that architects have for themselves, especially at school, is, you know, what is generic, what is appropriate for our time and for our culture, how can we work collectively towards that, as opposed to striving for idiosyncrasies. So, the generic versus the idiosyncratic. Right? That is the fundamental schism in our time. And I know where I put my preference, but you know, I'm not. I am the president of the International Committee of Architectural Critics, but I don't wield any kind of, you know, Trumpian power to say tariff, tariff, tariff.
Well, but you can. Well, many thanks, Wilfried. Let's close the session saying that it was a great lecture and that we hope to have you again in a close future. Many thanks.